Great job. Looks like I have it now. Oh, how are you, sir? No food or beverage in the auditorium, I'm told. Oh, water is okay. So no food. See, doesn't make sense. No food or beverage except water. So please, if you have food in here, take it out so we don't get in trouble. We want to honor the church that's allowed us to be here. All right, guys, everybody grab a seat, and we'll, I don't know if y'all were here earlier. If you heard the rules, you get a rebuttal card. So that red card that is sitting in front of you there is a rebuttal card. Since there's only 3 of you, look, guys, let's go ahead and give them 2. Since there's only 3 in the race, we'll let them have 2. If you've been here last night, you'd have had 4. It's just all, we're making this up as we go. All right, so you get a rebuttal card, and you can use it anytime you want. You use it in your intro, you can use it in your closing statement, or you can use it to respond. If another candidate says something you want to respond to right after they're answered, you're welcome to do that as well. So, just randomly going right down the line here, we'll just start with, where's Dan? There he is. You know how to make an entrance, don't you?
Sorry.
All right, so Dan, since you're up and down, we'll go ahead and hand you a mic, you start us, and then you can pick your seat after that. So Dan Branch, and then, so Representative Dan Branch, Senator Ken Paxton, and Commissioner Barry Smitherman, our candidates for Attorney General. Welcome them all. And Dan, I was just explaining, everybody gets a rebuttal card. You can use it anytime you want in your intro. Everybody gets 2 minutes for your intro. You can add that if you want, or you can use it in your outro, or you can, that's a radio word, I shouldn't have used that. Use it in your closing, and then you can use it to respond to somebody if you like. You get 1 minute, yeah, 1 minute for that. On the answers, on your intro you get 2 minutes, on your close you get 2 minutes, and on your answers to every question you only get 1 minute. I know that's tough, but we want to get as many issues in as we can. So, Dan, go ahead. You start us with a 2-minute intro.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for being here. I'm really impressed at the spirit in Montgomery County, and with a baseball game going on, your fortitude is impressive. And I know you stayed late for the same reason I'm running for this office, because this office matters. My name's Dan Branch. I'm running for the office of Attorney General because it not only matters to our state, it matters to our nation. State's Attorney General are the last bastion of pushing back against this overreaching federal government. And so I'm grateful for you being here, because this office matters, not just to Texas, but to our country. I want to introduce my lovely wife, Stacy, of 29 years. We have 5 children, and we're just recently empty nesters, and we've gotten 3 through college and 2 still in, and so it's a little bit about me. I'm the guy who grew up in San Antonio, married the girl from Dallas, and you know how that works. Ended up in Dallas. I've been fortunate to represent my community in the legislature, and done so now for over a decade, and serve my constituents and you all, the state of Texas, in the House of Representatives. I had the great fortune after law school, when Stacy and I met, to work for the Texas Supreme Court, to work for the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Texas, and serve in that court with a great opportunity. And I've spent the next 29 years practicing law, both in very large firms, and started my own firm and built it up and joined a large firm, and did that trying to keep my clients out of the courtroom after spending a year in arguably the most important courtroom. I'm running for 3 reasons: to push back against the federal government, to ensure transparency so you can hold us accountable here in Texas, and also to preserve limited government. And the Attorney General's office has an important role in all 3 of those areas, and I hope to get to visit with you about that tonight as we talk about it. Again, Dan Branch, danbranch.com. You can learn a lot more about me on our website. Thank you.
Senator Paxton, and I apologize, guys, I did it again. I did this in the last race. We forgot to explain our time cards down here. They'll give you a 1 minute. Well, now that in your intro, you'll get a 1 minute warning, 30-second warning, 10-second warning, and then finish, and they're going to hold up high so everybody knows time's up. And then in the questions, they'll just give you the 30-second, 10-second finish. Sorry, Senator, go ahead.
Fantastic being in Montgomery County. This county reminds me a lot of my home county, Collin County. It's a very fast growth district, and it's very Republican, so I feel very at home being here in Montgomery County tonight. Thank you for doing this. This is a critical time in our country. And I want to tell you a quick story. I grew up in an Air Force family, and I remember my first vivid memory of my parents and what they were doing. I remember my dad being told he was going off to Vietnam. And I didn't know what Vietnam meant, but I knew it was serious. And I remember standing there at the airport, on top of the airport, with my mother holding her hand. I was in kindergarten, it was a cold day, and I was holding her hand. She started squeezing my hand as my dad walked out onto the tarmac. And he slowly walked up to the airplane. It was all outside. And I remember him turning around and saluting us and waving. And I remember holding my mother's hands, and I felt the tears hitting my hand. And I knew that what my dad was doing was important, and I knew that it was serious. My dad exhibited courage. He spent 21 years flying B-52s and flying in the Air Force. Courage is the missing ingredient in today's politics. We all know what the right thing to do is. We all know what the right thing to say is. You're going to hear it all night long. You're going to hear it all through the campaign. But courage to do the right thing, and I think that's one reason that Ted Cruz has made such a difference, because he's exhibited the courage that we're all looking for. And I've had that opportunity for the last 11 years in the Texas House and the Texas Senate to do some of those same things. And sometimes standing up against your own party is the hardest thing to do. I had the opportunity this session to stop the expansion of Obamacare in Texas. But sometimes voting against the budget, the Republican budget, is harder. And if I'm your Attorney General, not only will I fight the Obama administration, but I'll stand up for you no matter what the circumstances. Thank you.
Commissioner Smitherman.
Thank you. I'm Barry Smitherman, and I'm honored to be with you all here this evening. Thank you so much for what you do to make candidates accountable, to require them to meet the commitments that they give you while they're running after they get elected. I grew up not too far from here in Highlands on the banks of the San Jacinto River. My wife and I, Mary Jane, we've been married for almost 27 years. We have 4 children. I'm currently the chairman of the Texas Railroad Commission. With the help of many of you in this room, I was elected to that position last year with 74% of the vote. It was my first time to ever run for office. I've also been the chairman of the Public Utility Commission, a prosecutor in the Harris County DA's office, and I spent 17 years in the private sector. You heard a lot tonight from some of the previous speakers about what's happening in the oil and gas world in Texas. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the Railroad Commission shepherds that oil and gas. When I arrived there a couple of years ago, I have to tell you, the place was not in good shape. Today, we have dramatically reduced permit turnaround times. We are empowering the oil and gas industry in Texas to lead America to energy independence. Today in Texas, we'll bring 1.8 million barrels of crude oil to the surface. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of buying oil from people that hate America. As your next Attorney General, I will continue the fights against the Obama EPA that I've already begun. Working with General Abbott, I'm a petitioner on 7 lawsuits to stop boneheaded, poorly scienced environmental regulation. Everybody talks about fighting Obama. I'm actually fighting Obama. Thank you very much.
Okay, fellas, in every other race, I started with a softball question. But the AG's got to be the toughest guy in Texas, so no softballs for you guys. As the chief law enforcement officer in the state, what action would you take regarding the controversy about allegations that legislators have pushed for preferential treatment of friends and family applying to our flagship universities that receive millions in state aid? And let's see, Dan went first, so we'll go to the middle, Ken, and then around.
Can you repeat the question?
What action would you take as Attorney General regarding this controversy right now on allegations that some of our state legislators and other leaders have pushed for preferential treatment of their friends and even their own family when applying to the University of Texas and other flagships?
Well, the legislature, I have always, one of my focus in the legislature has been transparency in state government. My first session, we passed legislation that would require all state contracts to be online. So in this case, since we're talking about public institutions, I would make the strong argument that all of that should be disclosed, should be put on the internet, and be open to public scrutiny.
Commissioner Smitherman.
Rick, I have 3 children that are in college. One just graduated from A&M, one's a senior at A&M. And it is hard for our kids to get into these flagship schools. It should be entirely merit. There should be no favoritism. These kids work their tail off. They sacrifice. Many of them don't play sports. Some of them don't do band. They don't do speech because they're so focused on making good grades and getting into UT and A&M and U of H and Texas Tech. It has to be fair. This is what drives the average person crazy. When there is a belief that the deck is stacked against them, and that if you're on the inside, you get the sweetheart deal. You can't allow that to happen. As Attorney General, I'll stop it if it's happening now. I won't let it go forward.
Representative Branch.
Absolutely. It's all about accountability, and you got to have a transparent government. I'm someone who has a record from when I first came in, who's worked really hard for transparency, whether that was training about the Open Meetings Act or whether that was training about the Public Information Act. We have to have complete transparency. Things have to be on the merits. It's very hard with someone who's worked to reform the top 10% rule. It's very hard to get into our colleges and universities. We have to keep the tuition down as much as possible. We have to make sure this is a fair playing ground. And so absolutely, as Attorney General, I will stand up for accountability and for openness and transparency, and we ought to have things done on objective metrics and on the merits. And so I've got a strong record of pushing for accountability even within the legislature. Whether it's the House or the Senate, you can't pass a bill now without there being a record because of my constitutional amendment. So strong record on that, Rick.
Okay, John Cornyn previously held the position you now seek. So we could assume that if you win this race, you could someday represent us in the United States Senate. There's been a lot of talk the last couple of weeks regarding Ted Cruz's stance to try and stop Obamacare. I remember the last time socialized medicine was being discussed, we had a U.S. Senator from Texas that said, "Over my cold, dead body," that being Phil Graham, of course. My question to you is, and some people are saying, there's just a big difference in the way Ted Cruz is fighting and the way John Cornyn is fighting. So this is a leadership style question for you guys. Without giving us typical politician doublespeak, are you a Ted Cruz type leader that will take the fight to the opposition aggressively? Or are you a John Cornyn type leader who will play it safe with moderates like John McCain and Lindsey Graham? How's that for a hot seat question, boys? I noticed that race is not in our debate, but I just had to get something in there.
Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz, in his 22-hour filibuster, articulated for the American people the problems with Obamacare. Not only that, he educated us on constitutional law. I tweeted out as I watched the proceedings, one of my children was with me, and he said, "Dad, I've learned more watching Ted Cruz tonight than I did in 4 years of poli-sci class." Ted is a leader. He's a bold leader, and that is what we are looking for. Texans, Americans are hungry for someone who will stand up and make a difference, that doesn't care if people call them names, that doesn't care if people say they're just trying to do it for themselves. In Ted's case, he was as articulate and forceful at the end as he was at the beginning, and I'm proud to call him a friend, and we'd be proud to be considered in the same breath with him.
Yeah, that's right. It'll be Dan next.
Yeah, my style, Rick, is very aggressive. I think this office is going to have someone who's tough, smart, competent, and I think we're going to be having an attorney general that needs to be in an environment where the federal government is even more overreaching, more arrogant, and that's what we're seeing right now. So we need to have someone who will take it to the federal government. I don't think it's unpatriotic for folks like yourselves and then your leaders to point out to the national government that they have a role, and that's not infringing on the sovereignty of the state of Texas, that they need to remember there's a 9th and 10th Amendment, and that they do have a role as a national government, and that's to enforce our borders and secure our borders and get our treaties watered from Mexico. Absolutely. So I think this office, Rick, will take someone who has a very aggressive style, and I'm happy to have many of the legal advisors and senior advisors of Ted Cruz look at all three candidates and support our message and support our campaign. In fact, his treasurer last week came on to support our campaign.
Okay, Ken, I gotta stop you just for a second. Close your ears if you don't want to know, but in the bottom of the sixth, Big Papi hit a 2-run homer. So the Red Sox are up 2-1 over the Cardinals. Now, Ken, sorry.
Thank you for that very important information. You know, I think it's easy to say you're going to be tough against the Obama administration, and sometimes I found at this session that it was easier for me to tell Democrats I was going to kill their Obama expansion than it was for me to tell a Republican I was going to vote against their budget. And so I relate to Ted Cruz because I know what it's like to not just tell Democrats no, but I also know what it's like to have to tell my own party no. I've had that opportunity since the day I got there. When we were pushing a payroll tax, and I had to be one of a very few number of Republicans to say no and try to kill it, and I did that. I had to do that when I was fighting the franchise tax. I've had to do that on 2 Republican budgets, and I had to do that when I had to call the Speaker of the House after he was elected by 65 Democrats and tell him I was running against him. Let me just tell you, it's challenging. I respect Ted Cruz because I know exactly what he's had to suffer through, not just going against Obama, but going sometimes in opposition to his own party.
Since you mentioned that, that was an intra-party fight and continues to be over when you ran for Speaker against Speaker Strauss. So if I could ask all three of you the same question I've asked, I think in every race, I may have forgotten in the earlier race, but supporter of Joe Strauss or opposed to Joe Strauss? And I think, Barry, you're next. In terms of, again, this style of leadership and moderate or conservative.
Well, certainly my style of leadership is bold. Everyone, again, talks about fighting Obama. I'm actually fighting Obama. We have 7 lawsuits against the EPA, 4 of which, Rick, are going to be heard at the U.S. Supreme Court this fall and in the spring. I think it's very important to recognize the AG's office is not a policy maker. It's a policy implementer. We take the laws given to us by the legislature. We enforce them boldly and vigorously. I don't have a vote on Joe Strauss, on whether Joe Strauss is Speaker, becomes Speaker again. That's not my role. I'm not a voting person. These guys have voted. What I have done is to lead 2 large, important state agencies and do it in an effective and efficient manner.
Yeah, I think everyone knows that we've had a Speaker for the last 3 terms that's been unopposed. And I think the real issue, Rick, is what have these people who've come tonight, what have they gotten because of their engagement? And what have they gotten from the House of Representatives? And whether that's a balanced budget for 6 terms now since I've come in with a Republican majority in 2003, or whether that's a tax cut of over $1 billion this time and a balanced budget, and whether that's a rainy day fund that's the largest in its history, the last 2 sessions that we've ever had, and whether that's a pro-life, landmark pro-life legislation that you all have pushed for and held us accountable to, whether that's more rights for Second Amendment and concealed handgun and expansion of gun rights in Texas, or whether that's for private property rights that you all have held us accountable for and pushed for and we've delivered on, or whether that's tort reform or the voter ID bill that went into effect this week, notwithstanding Eric Holder. And so that's the style of leadership that this crowd,
you want to use a rebuttal
like
card?
You across the state are pushing for.
You want to use a rebuttal card? I didn't know if you want to keep going on your...
Oh, no,
You're good? Okay, all right.
Thank you.
So I'm going to be a little more direct. I have made no secret that I was not a fan of Speaker Strauss. That's why I ran against him. And here's the issue. We have a Republican Speaker largely elected by a Democratic House. And the problem that we have is that the Democrats have a lot of say in what legislation that gets passed. And so a lot of our conservative legislation cannot make it to the floor. And so you never get to see it. We don't have the opportunity. We have a super majority of Republicans in the House. We almost have a super majority in the Senate. And yet, we can't pass most of our conservative legislation. Yeah, we get lip service. We got a few pieces of legislation through, like voter ID, sonogram. That came because I ran for Speaker. Those bills were killed the session before under Strauss. When I ran for Speaker, I ran on those issues and we passed them. But those are the only things we passed. Without a conservative Speaker, we're losing out. We need to change that.
But you guys, I think Dan mentioned the increasing federal government. Let's go there. With the increasing growth of the federal government, you will be on the front lines of those conflicts between the federal government and our state government. How would you summarize your understanding of enumerated powers and the proper jurisdiction of various levels of government? And I don't remember who got went first last time. I think no, Dan, you went first last time. Go ahead. I can't remember who went first last time.
Well, let me just say this, that again, I think we're entering an environment where the federal government, this administration, this U.S. Attorney General, this President, this IRS, this NSA, this DOJ, this EPA is the most aggressive we've seen in modern history. And therefore, we better have someone who not only talks about pushing back, but actually has practiced law for 3 decades and has a record in the legislature of effectively pushing back. And I have that record. I have pushed back, and let me tell you, whether that's...
Dan, wait, if I can interrupt you, but my question is, what do you understand as enumerated powers and proper jurisdiction? Because we have so much confusion about who's supposed to do what.
Well, and to me, it all comes down to the respect for the 10th Amendment. And you got to understand, I mean, our national government has to remember that as the federal government, it was created by the states. And it's not, like I say, it is not unpatriotic to point out to the federal government that is a national government created by states, and it has certain limitations and reserve powers, liberties to the people, and reserve powers to the states. And that national government is supposed to protect an international border. When you have a state like Texas that has such a long international border, it is the Attorney General's job to point out that that national government has to stand up for a secure border and also deliver international treaties, water from Mexico.
Since I interrupted him, I'll let him go over that time, because I took a little bit of your time. And Ken.
The Constitution was designed by our founders as a box around the power of the federal government. That was the purpose of the Constitution. It was not designed to give the federal government unlimited powers. It was designed to retain that with the people and with the states. The 10th Amendment was a punctuation mark on that. The Obama administration has complete disdain for the Constitution. They really could care less what those words mean, and that's why we have this battle with the administration, the EPA, with OSHA, with the IRS, with Eric Holder, with voter ID. The list is endless. And that's why, in my opinion, this Attorney General position, is the most important position in the state of Texas right now. And that's why your vote matters so much.
Rick, the federal government is completely out of control. 17 trillion in debt. Obamacare would assume 20 to 30% of our economy. The 10th Amendment was designed to have the states occupy the ground that we did not give to the federal government. So we have to fight back at every turn. We can't talk about fighting back, we have to fight back. You have to take steps to prepare our citizens to be the best that we can be. I'll give you an example. At the Railroad Commission, the first day that I became chairman, we had a rule that prohibited our CHL holders from carrying. I eliminated that. I took it one step further, and we conducted classes at the Railroad Commission for our employees that wanted to be licensed. The Second Amendment is the foundation. It protects all the other amendments. In Texas, we've done a good job on this, but you can't just talk about supporting it. You have to take proactive steps to get your employees and the citizens prepared for what may happen in the future.
Let's talk about ways to get them back into their proper jurisdiction. Mark Levin has a new book out called Liberty Amendments. It proposes several constitutional amendments through an Article 5 convention that would restore our constitutional republic. What is your opinion? The reason I'm asking you is because if it continues to gain steam like I think it's going to, you're going to be called on as AG probably to issue an opinion on how we should choose delegates to that convention and that sort of thing. So what's your opinion about having an Article 5 convention, and what constitutional amendments, if any, would you support? And Ken would be next.
You know, I have not, since I've been campaigning since that book came out. I haven't had a chance to read it, but I understand the concept. And I understand the frustration that people have in this country with the federal government and why they want to go in and have a constitutional convention. The one issue that I strongly feel that would be critical at this time is balancing the budget. We are almost $17 trillion in debt. with no hope of changing that. And unless the states can find a way to get a grip on Congress and to get a grip on the federal government, we're going to be bankrupt, much like Detroit is now. And so I am very open to that particular idea, because without it, I think we're in trouble.
You know, again, the Attorney General's job is to enforce the law. Whatever the legislature passes, whatever comes out of it, that's our responsibility. But like Ken, I'm very troubled by $17 trillion in debt. It is bigger than our GDP. By the time Obama is out of office, it'll be more than $20 trillion in debt. And it begins to be difficult to imagine how the United States manages that going forward. We have a thriving, incredibly vibrant economy here in Texas. It's grounded primarily in the oil and gas industry. We have to continue to drive those industries forward. That means keeping Obama out of the fossil fuel industry, which he would love to shut down, and he would love to regulate, because he hates fracking and he wants to put his green energy policies in place. So whatever, I don't know what all the opportunities are, Rick, but we need to look at all of them.
Dan.
Yeah, I've read the book and actually know Mark, and he and I went to a similar program when we were Goldwater Scholars up at Georgetown. And I think it's very interesting. He's got some very creative, thoughtful ideas and reminds us about the parts of the Constitution that people seem to have forgotten. So I would agree with my colleagues. Obviously, balancing a budget is critical. The state of Texas, I've participated in that. We balance our budget every year. We are a model for other states, and I think a model for the federal government. And we should absolutely have a balanced budget. But I also think we ought to focus on fights that we can win and fights that are really urgent. And I would say that standing up to an overreaching federal government, as opposed to waiting for a convention of many states, and pushing back and doing what states attorney generals are doing in other states like Oklahoma and Indiana and Virginia, and pushing it back again, looking for ways, constitutional ways, to take apart this monster of Obamacare. That's what I'm going to focus my energies on as the next Attorney General. Thank you.
Okay, so let me try this again. Yes or no? Article 5 convention. Would you support it or not support it? Yes or no? Ken? Yes.
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 Yeah, of course. But again, as the Attorney General...
No, I understand. You got to do your job too. But I mean, if his momentum continues, you guys are going to be faced with this issue and advising the state on this issue. He actually, let's just stick with this for just a second. He mentions the Commerce Clause and has an amendment dealing with the Commerce Clause. When we talk about jurisdictions, we talk about where the federal government ought to be intruding in our business here. Justice Roberts says in the Obamacare case that the path of our Commerce Clause decisions has not always run smooth, but it is now well established that Congress has broad authority under the clause. Question for you guys. You're going to be our top constitutional scholar for Texas. Well established by whom? In other words, what specific areas of commerce does the Constitution give Congress the power to regulate, and who specifically has the power to expand that authority to be broad like Justice Roberts claims that it is? I think Barry's first this time.
Unfortunately, the Commerce Clause has been abused. It's been used as an excuse for an ever-increasing encroachment by the federal government. They use that every opportunity they get. It may have begun back in the civil rights movement as a legitimate way to eliminate Jim Crow laws and bring some equality, but unfortunately today, we see it cropping up all the time. For example, we see it in the Windsor case, which is the invalidation of the Defense of Marriage Act, where the court took great liberties to put in place what they wanted the result to be, not what the law that had been passed by the Congress and signed by President Clinton was. So we have to rein this back in. It has become the catch-all mechanism for the federal government doing just about whatever they want, and that's got to stop.
Dan, same question.
Yeah, it's a really good point, Rick. And to me, one of the perhaps the only good thing that came out of the Obamacare decision, the Roberts decision, was reining in the Commerce Clause. And some scholars think that this will, over the long term, if we can maintain a conservative majority on the Supreme Court, which means winning the Oval Office next time, in my judgment, given the age of some of the justices, that we can, in fact, continue to rein in the Commerce Clause, and so it's only limited to interstate commerce, and they're not basically getting into intrastate commerce in the states, which is why it's been blown open, and all of a sudden we've lost control of our state sovereignty. So for me, this is an opportunity for conservatives, smart, capable, competent, tough attorney generals across the state, across America, that can stand up and push back. For example, in Texas, that decision said we can't be bribed. Texas can't be forced to expand Medicaid under the Commerce Clause. One of the wins for our state.
Ken.
You know, I talked about this earlier. The Constitution is a box around the power of the federal government. And the Commerce Clause has been the leakage out. It is the antithesis of the 10th Amendment. You have the 10th Amendment, you have the Commerce Clause. They are in opposition to each other. So in my opinion, the courts, starting back under FDR, they started using the Commerce Clause so that Congress could control more and more what's going on in the states. In my opinion, that was a misinterpretation of the Commerce Clause. We need to push back. We need to move the Commerce Clause out, and we need to go back to the 10th Amendment the way we were for 150 years.
We had several folks ask about this one. I should say a lot of folks, not just several. Sharia law. It's now been cited. Sharia law has now been cited or otherwise used in hundreds of cases across America. 8 states have passed a piece of model legislation called American Law for American Courts to prevent that from happening in their states. Do you have an opinion on Sharia law and what it can mean for our legal system? And would you support the American Law for American Courts model legislation that was drafted by constitutional law experts? I think Barry's next, right? I'm sorry, guys. I'm terrible at keeping up. Are you next, Dan? I'm sorry.
Yeah. So
okay, then you're next.
Absolutely opposed to Sharia law, and yes, we shouldn't be looking at the UN, international law, Sharia law. We should be looking at Texas law. And as your next Attorney General, if I'm honored enough to serve, we're going to be focusing on American law and primarily Texas law, and we're going to be pushing back against any interpretation of something beyond that. We've got enough trouble in this state pushing it back, as I've talked about, against this administration trying to overreach onto state of Texas law. And as someone who spent many months and many late nights working for the state Supreme Court, I can tell you that I will be one who will be on the front lines, on the vanguard of trying to uphold Texas law and push back not only against international law, but against intrusions by this administration and this federal government.
So I'm not going to just tell you I'm against it. I'm going to tell you what I've done. And what I did was I filed as the first joint author of that bill when John Corona filed it in the Senate. I was an early supporter, and I fought to get it out of committee. Unfortunately, we could not get it out of the Senate, but I was an early supporter of that bill.
Commissioner.
American law is derived from the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Sharia law has no place in our society. What happens when you allow judges, justices, and other advocates to begin to incorporate law from outside of our country, international law, for example, you get decisions like Roe v. Wade. If you'll go back and read the Roe decision, the judges who were in the majority voting to allow abortions to happen were citing back to British law. They recited a whole litany of American jurisprudence, generally accepted medical practices, and codes of the day, and then at the end of the decision, reference back to a recently passed law in the UK. That's ridiculous. We cannot allow that to happen in the state of Texas.
Okay, I saved a softball for you here towards the end. Last night we talked about the Public Integrity Unit and potentially moving that from Travis County to you guys with the debacle with the current DA being arrested and all that. Governor Perry withdrew the funds or line items of funds or however that worked, and then, but it will come back to the legislature. The question is, would you want it? If the Public Integrity Unit was moved from Travis County DA so that the AG, you guys are going to be elected by the whole state, that person's only elected by Travis County, would you want that responsibility over at the AG's office?
I would say absolutely, because the Travis County DA should not have responsibility for those type of issues for the whole state. First of all, it tends to be a very Democratic county, and in my opinion, it's very unfair. It ought to be held by the Attorney General, who's elected not just by Montgomery County, not just by Travis County, but by the whole state. To me, it's a very common sense approach and something that needs to be done immediately.
Absolutely. That office is not representative of the values of the state of Texas. Plus, the current occupant was arrested for DWI. As a former prosecutor in the Harris County DA's office, I prosecuted a lot of DWI cases. Can you imagine trying to get a conviction in a DWI case when your boss, the DA herself, was also arrested for DWI, pled guilty, and then served time in jail? Can you imagine the defense attorney's closing argument on that one? Absolutely. The time has come, and this is a good reason to do it now.
Absolutely, think it ought to be in the Attorney General's office. If that's where the legislature decides it should be, then I'll look forward to expanding integrity in the state, just like we should be expanding transparency. And let me just give you an example of standing up to not only Democrats, but also Republicans. When I came to the legislature, you could pass a bill in the House or the Senate on final passage, a bill affecting all of you, millions of Texans, and no one being accountable. Because it was a voice vote, a viva voce, the Latin term, or a secret ballot, if you will. And so I worked with folks like yourselves, and in 2007 we passed a constitutional amendment, 85% passage, and today there is transparency, there is a record, which is ultimately integrity, and so people are accountable for any new bill that affects millions of Texans on final passage, and they are held accountable by the citizens as they should be as public servants.
Sorry, yeah, start doing that one. Okay, so we got two more quick ones, then we'll close. The if school choice was adopted in Texas, I would assume it'd be like voter ID and everything else, or like what's happening in Louisiana now. It's going to end up in the courts, and we're going to be looking to you guys for advice and potentially defending that law. Is that something that you would not only defend because of your responsibility, but defend passionately, and have you worked on that issue in the past?
Absolutely. One of the only options for a parent that's stuck in a bad school is the ability to choose another school. Competition works. It's what's great about America is it empowers you to make a choice with your feet and with your money. With our 4 children, we've had a number of options. We homeschooled my daughter. We sent one of my sons to a private religious school, and the 2 others went through public schools. We had options in our neighborhood, but many people are trapped. They're trapped in bad schools. So they ought to have the option. Let the dollars follow the kid, and by all means, make sure that every parent has the right to homeschool their children.
The answer is yes, Rick, and I haven't just talked about it. I've actually taken the hard votes. For example, this session, someone came along with an amendment to the budget and said we're not going to be able to put any funds toward vouchers, and I voted against that. And I've served on the Public Aid Committee, and I've pushed for more charter schools and more choice. And so this is something that I care about deeply as a father of 5 kids. I think that if we gave more choice and we had more competition in our public school system, that we would have a better result. We'd have more educated workers, and our children in Texas would be more prepared to meet the competition. So absolutely, obviously, I would uphold the law as the Attorney General, but if that were the law, then I would be passionate about defending it.
Ken, not only have I been supportive of this, but I've filed bills in 3 or 4 sessions to allow for school choice. My kids have also gone to public school, private school, and they've been homeschooled. They've had opportunities. And I'll never forget sitting down with my superintendent, McKinney, and he was really mad that I'd voted for school choice. And I said, Mr. Superintendent, I don't understand why you're against it. This is a pilot program. It doesn't even affect our school district. Our kids are doing great. And he said, well, I'm just worried that if, you pass it, it'll spread. And I said, Mr. Superintendent, it'll only spread if it works. Why is that bad? And he had no answer for me. We're afraid of giving kids an opportunity that have no hope. And that's why I believe this is important. We need to provide, just like the rest of the United States, we need competition. We need opportunity. And I completely believe in the opportunity for parents to decide where their kids go to school.
Okay, guys, very easy one for you. Very easy one. You guys have been great tonight. This one's simple. Name us an American founding principle and give your opinion of whether or not it's being eroded and what we can do to restore it. Dan, I think you're up.
For me, Rick, it would be limited government. And why that's so important to me is because Texas, I think, is one of the last great states that's an example of truly having a heritage of limited government, going back to our Constitution, debated in 1875, passed in 1876, high distrust for centralized power in Austin. We do a lot of things like bringing our citizen legislators home every other year and making them live under the laws, not having exceptions to the laws like we do in Washington. So to me, limited government is one of the reasons why this office is so important. Because ultimately, with the Attorney General power, with the various divisions in this office, but particularly with the opinion power, you are going to have someone who at the end of the day is going to err on the side of less as opposed to more, clear as opposed to ambiguous. We want to have light, appropriate regulations. Limited government, preserve limited government in the state of Texas. That's why people are flocking here, not just because of low taxation, but also because of limited government. To me, critically important principle. When you have other states going the exact opposite direction, we have the federal government going the opposite direction.
And I forgot to say, it's unfair to you guys going second and third, but don't do the same one somebody else already did. So Ken, go ahead.
Limited government.
I guess I should have said that at the beginning, huh?
Liberty. Liberty. Our founding fathers came here for freedom and liberty. And they came here for religious liberty, political liberty, free speech. At every turn, those are being eroded. And we all know it. And that's why you all are here. And that's why Texas is so critical. Because Texas, in my opinion, is the hope of this country. And if we can get these decisions right now, if we can elect the right people who will do the right thing and who will fight the fight, people like Ted Cruz, we can turn this country because other states look to us and they need us. And so we have to do it. We have to pick the right people. We have to fight the fight. And I'm glad that you're here and that you're a part of it.
It's pretty simple. We're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. This is the first experiment in mankind where our rights are recognized to come from God. They do not come from another man. They do not come from the king. They do not come from a baron or a lord. They come from God. And they cannot be taken away by man because they are from God Almighty. We have emboldened our people to be free, to have liberty and choice, and that is because we know that we're centered to God rather than to another man.
Okay, closing statements. And close your ears if you don't want to know, because in the top of the seventh, the Cards have scored 3. It's Cardinals up over the Sox 4-2. Okay, so closing statement, the way we've been doing this, whoever went first in opening goes first in closing, so you don't get first and last words. So we'll go back down this way again for our closing statements. 2, and you get 3 minutes because y'all are no fun. Nobody used a rebuttal card. So you can go 3 if you like, or you can go 2 and win more votes.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Rick. Thank you all, and thank for the young men down here who've done a great job giving us some time. How about a hand for them? I'll use some of my time for you all. Again, my name is Dan Branch, and I'm running for this office because I think this is one of the most important offices. As one of the largest states, one of the last large state that is a model of limited government, we better have a tough, smart, competent Attorney General that's willing to fight and stand up to this federal government. And why, when you decide who that should be, you should make that decision, in my view, based on someone who has a record of already doing that. As a constitutional conservative, don't just look at the endorsements of all the senior lieutenants from Greg Abbott who've endorsed our campaign, or the senior legal advisors and campaign advisors from Ted Cruz, or the justices of the court and the various my peers in the legislature. We have great endorsements. You can go to our website and read about those and make your decision. But I think you should make a decision based on someone who actually has a record. And let me tell you, if I could, one quick story that says something about my approach to pushing back. I stand here in this church, I look at the Texas flag and the U.S. flag and the cross behind me, and it reminds me that when I came into the legislature 10 years ago, I have been very disturbed by an opinion of the Supreme Court where 6 activist federal judges had told the state of Alabama that their students couldn't have prayer, they couldn't have silent prayer in their state. And everyone told me to branch ahead, that'll never happen again. We've lost prayer in the schools. And I came in 2003, and in the first session, worked closely with General Abbott, worked closely with his solicitor, a young man named Cruz, Ted Cruz, a young Solicitor General, and we were really careful and wrote the language really precisely. And so that when we passed it, and it became law, and when it was challenged by the left, because we knew it would be, then Solicitor Cruz could successfully defend it in federal district court. And then his successor, Jim Ho, who's endorsing our campaign, his successor, Jim Ho, could successfully defend it in the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans. And so that ultimately today, 10 years later, 5 million school children today were able to say a silent prayer in the state of Texas and say the pledge to the Texas and the U.S. flags. That's pushing back against an aggressive, overreaching federal government. So I hope you'll join the many great folks who've already taken a close look at this campaign and looked at all three of us and selected our message and our campaign and going to choose to work with me. And I hope you will give us serious consideration. Go to our website, take a look at it. But ultimately, I ask you here tonight, I ask you to please consider my candidacy, and I'm here to humbly ask for your vote. Not only in the straw poll, but most importantly in the primary to come. Thank you. Thank you, Rick.
When I get to the legislature in the House 11 years ago, the world was different. The world was different for Texas. And what I mean by that is legislators, we focused on issues related to Texas. But since Obama's been elected, that's changed. We now deal with a lot of federal issues, a lot of intrusion into our lives, individually and as a state. You all have a very important job, a very difficult job. You have to cast a vote for one of the most important positions in this state and in this state's history. And you don't personally know us. For the most part, most of you don't personally know us. And this is a struggle we had when Obama was elected. He was a great speaker. He cast a great vision. But the people who voted, not you, but many of the people who voted, failed to go back and look at what he'd done in the past. They failed to look at his record, which was abysmal. It would be easily determinable what he was going to do in the future based on what he'd done in the past. And that's why I ask you to look at my past. Look at my voting record over 11 years. It's been one of the most conservative, consistent records in the House and the Senate. This session in the Senate, the Texas Young Conservatives ranked me the highest. This session in the Senate, Concerned Women for America ranked me the highest. This session in the Senate, Texas for Fiscal Responsibility ranked me the highest. Texas Eagle Forum did the same thing. That record has been consistent. Look at the record. And then second, look at who's endorsed me. The people that have endorsed me are people like Kay Goolsby, who was key in the Cruz campaign. She's here tonight. Kathy Adams with Texas Eagle Forum, a stalwart conservative. Kelly Shackford with Liberty Institute, who was Ted Cruz's statewide leadership chairman, a stalwart conservative. The list goes on. 24 conservative state reps, including your own Steve Toth, endorsed me. You are making a critical decision. The past is the best indicator of the future. I promise you this, you like me, my past will continue into the future, and I will fight for you. Thank you, and God bless you and Texas.
Rick, thank you, and thanks everyone here for coming tonight, for getting involved, and listening to these candidates for perhaps the most important position in the state of Texas. In the spring of 2009, it became obvious that President-elect Barack Obama was going to attempt to regulate CO2, that he was going to attempt to pass through the Congress cap and trade. He was going to try to make the thing that we're exhaling here tonight a pollutant that would be regulated by the EPA. Working with Governor Perry and General Abbott, I took the initiative to begin to educate our legislators, our congressmen and our senators about what this would mean if cap and trade were put in place. We did studies, we ran the numbers. It would have cost you an additional $30 billion a year in energy cost. I went to Washington and began to talk to our congressmen and our senators. In fact, at one point I said, if a congressman from Texas votes for this, they should be tried for treason. Because this will wreck our economy. It will take money from our citizens and give it to people who live in California and Massachusetts. It was flawed. It remains flawed today. But there weren't a lot of people talking about it. There weren't a lot of people pushing back. So with the help of General Abbott, we sued the EPA over what was called the endangerment finding. Their attempt to regulate CO2 emissions from stationary sources like power plants. Everybody said you can't win that. Federal government's going to get their way. They're going to regulate it. Well, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, we just got the Supreme Court to agree to hear these cases in the spring. We're going to win these cases. We're going to roll this back, and we're not going to allow this EPA to do what the Congress didn't do, to say that the Clean Air Act allows you to regulate CO2 and destroy this economy. I've done that with regard to coal-fired plants. The EPA tried to shut down some of our coal-fired plants, working with General Abbott. I sued them too, and we have won that case at every level. But undeterred, the EPA has also appealed to the Supreme Court, and that case will be heard. On endangered species, the lizard in the Permian Basin, the chicken, I've been the person out leading the fight for Texas. Now, these guys behind me will talk about fighting Obama. I'm actually fighting Obama. I'm the only prosecutor in this case. I'm the only one who knows his way around a courtroom and knows how to put bad people in jail. The Attorney General's job is not a voting job. It's a leadership job. It's a job about fighting the President of the United States and his EPA. I've done it, and I'll keep doing it for you as your next Attorney General. Thank you very much.
Okay, I do have one more question. Can we just get one of you guys to run for U.S. Senate? Y'all are